What's up, Kickin Lawyer crew? So today we'll talk about something that most of you probably don't care about, but I think that is very important, and it's a huge point of frustration for me, especially as a criminal defense attorney, and I would say that most criminal defense attorneys consider this kind of frustrating, and that is the burden of proof. What is the burden of proof? Who carries the burden of proof? Why should you care about the burden of proof? Well, here's the deal. So here I have with me Lady Justice. Wonderful Lady Justice. Many of you have probably seen statues like this before. They usually depict a often scantily clad lady. She usually has a sword of some sort. That's the swift sword of justice when it needs to be levied. She's blind, because justice is supposed to be blind and not care if you're man, woman, black, white, whatever. And then most of what we're going to focus on today are the scales of justice. And the scales weigh the evidence. And depending on the amount of evidence, the weight of the evidence, and who's supposed to carry the weight of the evidence, will dictate a lot of different things that happen both in our criminal and civil justice systems. So basically, there are several different burdens of proof that have been referenced throughout court over the course of American jurisprudence, but the main ones I think are, and since I usually talk about criminal defense, I'll touch briefly on the civil ones. I want you to view them like a pyramid, and I'll put an image up here in a second so you can go through them with me. Basically, if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, we start with the largest amount, and that's because as the levels of proof rise, there should be fewer cases that meet that burden because there's clearly more evidence. So the lowest amount would be like reasonable suspicion. In order for the government to take some even minor action against you, they need to have a reasonable suspicion that it basically means they can articulate facts that maybe something's going on. So for example, like a traffic stop, maybe you're swerving. You're not really even crossing the line, but you're kind of swerving in the lane. That could arguably be reasonable suspicion. And it may not be enough to write you a citation or arrest you or search your stuff or anything like that, but it's at least enough for the government to take some kind of action. So that just slightly tilts the scale, reasonable suspicion. Very small amount of proof. The next level is probable cause, and this is something you may have heard a lot. It's sort of detailed in the Fourth Amendment, and probable cause is what the government needs to seize you or your property, or to search you, or to get warrants and whatnot. They have to have probable cause. And that's facts and circumstances that would lead an ordinary person to believe that maybe something had happened. So a lot of times, like if you're checked by radar for speeding, there's probably probable cause that you were speeding. Or if there's a witness statement against you saying that you punched somebody, that might be probable cause that there was an assault that occurred or something like that. So probable cause is the next level, but it's important to understand that even though they can get warrants and things, that it's still not really that high a burden of proof. So it's more weight on the scale than reasonable suspicion, but it's just slightly above that. Now, the next two kind of deal with evidentiary burdens of proof and with civil law. So that's by preponderance of the evidence, which is a further tilt than probable cause, and by what's called clear and convincing evidence. And clear and convincing is pretty high. That's the highest in our civil system of civil court system, the highest burden of proof that has to be carried, and that's pretty weighty. And then, of course, the highest point, the peak of the pyramid in our criminal justice system is, in our court system in general, is beyond a reasonable doubt. And that requires the elimination of all reasonable doubt. So it's not that there's no doubt, it's just all reasonable doubt is gone. So the reason that's important and the reason it's frustrating to me as a defense attorney is beyond a reasonable doubt is a very high burden. And here I am in a southern state, southern area, and a lot of times southern juries automatically are against the defendant just because he's accused by the state, and I used to be a cop. I mean, I was cool with folks being pro police around here and stuff, but if the truth be told, I think really, I don't know that the state carries its burden all the time. The burden is on the state to prove that. So realistically, a defense attorney could sit there and do nothing. And after the state has put on whatever proof, if it doesn't rise to beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's not just on the one charge, okay? It's on each element of the charge that has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So if it's a burglary charge or an aggravated burglary charge, they have to prove that it's a dwelling house or whatever, a habitation, and that they entered to commit another felony or something like that, whatever the specific charge is in your state, they have to prove each element of that charge beyond a reasonable doubt. So if they don't comply with that and carry the burden on every element, then the jury should have a verdict of not guilty. That's what should happen. But my experience is, and I don't mean to sound jaded, that at least around here, that's not necessarily what always happens. When you have jury trials, a lot of times they side with the state, or maybe, I don't know, maybe they just don't understand the burden, and I'm not saying they're necessarily biased, well, I guess I am, but that's not what I mean to infer. I just mean that I think maybe they don't understand the burden. And I think if they did understand the burden, there'd be a lot more not guilty verdicts, because it's a very high, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is a very high burden. And I just think that it's difficult for the state to really carry that burden. So anyway, hey, tell me what you think. Send me some comments. Subscribe if you have any interest in these videos. I know they're all over the place, but it's kind of what I wanted, is to give you a broad overview of a lot of issues. If you need any assistance in the West Tennessee area, we'd be glad to assist you. You can contact us, the links and stuff below. And again, I'm Jerry Mason, the Kickin Lawyer, and I appreciate your viewership. We're coming up on a holiday weekend. I hope you have a good holiday, and talk to you guys later.